The first season of the latest live-action Star Wars show, Ahsoka, has just come to a close, and I have my non-spoiler and spoiler thoughts right now. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video I'm very excited to be talking about the first season of Ahsoka, the latest Star Wars show coming out on Disney Plus. It had 8 episodes and just wrapped tonight, and I want to start this off by saying that if you are a fan of this channel, then you know that I love Star Wars, so I'm going into this review with a lot of excitement. And a couple years back, when I got to go to Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim, California, I was actually at the panel for the Mandalorian Season 3, where at the very tail end they actually showed us some very quick footage of Ahsoka, and I was absolutely ecstatic in the vlog that I released all that time ago, talking about the fact that Rebels characters are going to be coming to live action for the very first time. They also show some footage for Ahsoka, which looks amazing, and all I'll say is that we get to see a live action Hera and a live action Sabine, and if you have not watched the animated stuff, specifically Star Wars Rebels, you are going to be lost moving forward. You need to watch it. This is a full-on follow-up to Star Wars Rebels. Ahsoka looks amazing. It was great to see the cast come out. Everybody was so excited. There was so much passion and energy, and just you could feel everybody just wanted to cry from excitement in there. And when I made my vlog after having seen that panel and that footage, I was incredibly excited, simply on the premise that Star Wars Rebels characters were going to be making their debut in live action. Now, we have had some characters that have appeared in live action from the animated stuff, most notably maybe a character like Bo-Katan, who was in the Clone Wars as well as Star Wars Rebels, and of course then appeared in The Mandalorian. But when I saw that they were going to be essentially creating Rebels Season 5 and calling it Ahsoka and in live action, I was very excited for it. And just leading up to this show in general, the hype train has been so real for me amongst many other Star Wars fans. But it was also a show that was going to be kind of divisive for some, or at least I thought in my mind was going to leave some fans out. And I will start this off by saying that I do think that is the case in a lot of ways. Ahsoka, if you are not familiar, is a character that was introduced about 15 years ago now at this point in the animated Star Wars movie, Star Wars The Clone Wars. Her character would continue on into Star Wars The Clone Wars, the actual series that ran for 7 seasons, and then would have her story continued on in Star Wars Rebels, as well as an expansion in things like Tales of the Jedi. She's a character that has had books and comics that have been about her, and in general, she's an ingrained part of the Star Wars mythology at this point. And I remember when she was originally introduced, played by Ashley Eckstein in that movie. I went to go see it in theaters on opening day, and I honestly was not crazy about Ahsoka. Here's this new character who is kind of just being thrown in as Anakin's apprentice in between the events of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. She's calling R2 R2-y, and she's saying all these different things that kind of just made me cringe a little bit. But over the course of the Clone Wars series, her character develops and grows up so much over the course of the events of the Clone Wars, and having her master be, you know, the future Darth Vader, and then having her character expanded upon in Rebels. She is easily one of the most developed characters, if not the most developed character across all of Star Wars. She's had so much screen time from the Clone Wars to Rebels to things like Tales of the Jedi, and then appearing in things like The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and now having her very own show where she's played by Rosario Dawson, who did appear in The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett. And so she's a character that's had a lot of history in Star Wars at this point, but most notably in the animated stuff. And there are a lot of fans of Star Wars who only like to watch live action stuff, and I tried so many ways to get a lot of my friends and other fellow fans to watch the animated stuff. Now, thankfully, I'm happy to say I succeeded on that with a lot of friends, co-workers, and just random individuals I met, even customers who come into my job who are Star Wars fans that are regulars, and I got them to check out the Clone Wars and Rebels. They'd come in, they'd talk to me about it and how much they were falling in love with these stories, just so that they were prepared for Ahsoka. If you're wondering, can I watch Ahsoka without having seen the animated stuff? I'm here to say I genuinely don't think so. This is not a show that's interested in holding your hand and giving you explanations on the character developments and things that you've missed from previous stories. This, for me, is payoff for the fans who have kept up with the other material outside of this general live action stuff. When I look at a series like The Mandalorian that has continued on narratives for things like the Darksaber in its own show, thankfully, with The Mandalorian, they've wholly made that series, for the most part, stand on its own. But you are absolutely going to benefit from the fact if you've seen the Clone Wars and Rebels, because those events do play into what happens in The Mandalorian. But when it comes to Ahsoka, this series is 110% a follow-up to specifically Star Wars Rebels, which ends with a sense of finality, but most notably does end with an open end and leaves a new adventure to be awaited. But that is what sets up the events of Ahsoka. That is where we're starting off. The ending of Rebels is the beginning of Ahsoka. And again, I think for me personally, it's not a show you could just jump into without having seen that other material. You could probably follow it enough, but I do genuinely think that you're doing yourself a disservice if you're a fan of Star Wars to just jump into this series without having seen the other things. And just on a personal perspective, taking away the critic hat, I genuinely think it's pretty idiotic to think that you can watch a live action series that is essentially the payoff of multiple years and seasons of television, of animated storytellings that have completely built up this character and all these other characters, and think you can just jump in at this point and not be lost to some degree. I think it would be a silly perspective to have, to be completely honest, and that's just coming from somebody who in general really appreciates continuity in things. And I would be silly for myself to hop into any series that I'm not familiar with and just jump in halfway and expect that I'm going to know what's going on. I can't blame the filmmakers for not holding my hand. And so in the case of Ahsoka, while this does spend some time at the very beginning of the show kind of reintroducing the characters and kind of what their motives are, it doesn't necessarily give you the full stakes of why these things are important to these characters and why they, are so driven to do them. It really does know and hope that you have seen Clone Wars and Rebels when you've gone into this show. So that's the last I'll say on that. I genuinely think you need to watch those shows before you watch this, without a shadow of a doubt. So as the show starts off, we're reintroduced to Ahsoka, played by Rosario Dawson, who is fantastic to see again. I mentioned when I did my review for season 2 of The Mandalorian, where she was initially introduced, that when I first heard Rosario Dawson was going to be playing the role, I was a little bit butthurt about it, to be completely and utterly honest, mainly because I'm a huge fan of Ashley Eckstein, who has voiced the character across all of the animated stuff, and for me is Ahsoka. And so to know we were going to have a new actress come in and have to play this character that is so beloved to so many of us seemed strange to me. But what I can say about it is at this point, Rosario Dawson has thankfully really won me over. I think she's done a great job of trying to honor the character as best she can, playing an older, more grounded version of the character. When we first meet the character of Ahsoka, she is very, naive in a lot of ways. And of course she ages, and I think Ashley Eckstein does an incredible job of really maturing her over the course of the animated shows. But here we're seeing her quite a bit older, and I think that Rosario Dawson does a good job of kind of putting the weight of the world on her shoulders, making her look like a more tenured, lived-in, mature iteration of Ahsoka. And I think for the most part, she does a really good job of keeping up with the mannerisms that Ahsoka has from the animated stuff. But most notably as well, if you saw my review for Mandalorian Season 3, then you know that I was hyped for the reveal of some of our Rebels characters in live action after we saw Zeb in Season 3 of The Mandalorian. And so here in this show, we're reintroduced to characters like Hera, that is played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead. You have Sabine Wren, played by Natasha Liu Bordizzo, and many others that we're definitely going to get into. I'm going to talk about individual people, but it was fantastic to see the Rebels crew once again. You got Chopper in here, who we have seen before in live action via things like Rogue One. But all this to say, I want to start this off by saying that I really enjoyed this show. I had a really great time with it. I think in a lot of ways this was such a great payoff for fans of Clone Wars and Rebels. There's a lot of fantastic moments that just being able to see these characters in live action, following up a narrative that we've been exploring in animation for so long, is just so awesome and so unique. There's not a lot of these big franchises that have done things like this. I know with Marvel, they did What If, which was cool, but it was its own thing, and you have the actors from the movies coming in to play a lot of these roles, but it's not like the next Marvel movie played directly off of What If, in the events of What If. It more so has referenced it at times, but it hasn't really done something where they have an animated installment in the franchise that is a pivotal part of kind of understanding where it's going. And I love that Star Wars has done that, because it's allowed for a lot of really interesting and different approaches to telling stories and keeping these really interesting characters involved in the narrative. And so being able to see the Rebels crew in live action, played mostly by different actors, but by really good casted roles, in my opinion, was phenomenal. I think that this show, for the most part, really just put a smile on my face most weeks. I got chills so many times watching the episodes. There were so many moments, even up to the final episode, that was giving me chills. There were so many fantastic fan service moments that, I mean, are just in there to just give you longtime Star Wars fans incredible moments of smiles. And then, of course, it's accompanied by the fantastic musical score given by Kevin Kiner, who, of course, has done the musical scores for things like The Clone Wars, Rebels, The Bad Batch, and now Ahsoka. And I've always loved Kevin Kiner's scores for Star Wars across all the animated stuff. I think he captures the essence of what John Williams would typically do, while also having his own flair to it. And so without a doubt, just the overall feel, the vibe, the excitement of being able to see this story from the animation come to live action was amazing. I found a lot of the moments with the characters to be great. I really thoroughly enjoyed myself on just an action level as well. And similar to most Star Wars things that are coming out these days, there's a fantastic blend of CGI as well as practical effects. I love the digital effects that were added in here, outside of a couple of moments where there was some green screen, or, you know, most notably the volume, that where they actually filmed these things, where it very noticeably was a green screen kind of effect. But for the most part, I think that the visual effects of this show were really top notch. And that's one thing I'm very happy when it comes to Star Wars, is that for the most part, I think the visual effects have always been pretty consistent. And I love that Lucasfilm is continually able to use a heavy amount of practical effects and practical sets, which just adds so much more to it. Now, I mentioned the volume. For anybody who's not familiar, that is the name of the technology. It's like a wraparound screen technology that they use to film a lot of Disney Plus shows, but it was originally used for The Mandalorian, and of course has been used on all of the Disney Plus shows up to this point. I think that Andor was the one that actually used more actual practical locations than the volume, but Ahsoka used the volume quite a bit, and there are times where you can tell that they're on the volume set, you know, that they're on that sound stage. There are times where it does look kind of green screeny, but it's a very minimal kind of complaint, to be completely honest. I think for the most part, the visual effects of this show, as well as the practical effects, are pretty consistent throughout, and I really enjoyed just the overall production value of the show, alongside the makeup and costume design and all the different things that go into the production. But now I'm sure you're probably wondering, are there any gripes I have with the series? And I think the biggest thing I could say I have an issue with when it comes to this show is something that I've had an issue with all of these Disney Plus shows, and that is the length. The show comes in at about 8 episodes, which for me, like most of these other Disney Plus shows, just doesn't give the story enough time to breathe, oftentimes making certain things feel rushed, breezed over, or having to set things up for a second season or whatever the next event franchise story is going to be, to, you know, really continue on that narrative. And in the case of Ahsoka, unfortunately, I do feel we have a little bit of that going on. The very beginning of the show for me was, again, a little bit of introduction of the new characters that are being involved here that we're going to talk about in a moment, but as well as reintroducing these characters that we all know and love, just even to us Star Wars fans, is seeing where they are after all this time, you know, seeing where they are after the events of Rebels, but most notably as well, kind of trying to set stuff up for people who are watching it without having seen the other stuff. I don't think it necessarily does a great job of fully giving you the scope of what's come before, but they try to kind of set things up to some degree. And once we got to like the middle part of the show is where I found it was at its height. That's when things I felt were at the most in movement. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of great fan servicey stuff, but as well as great character and story stuff as well. And as we got into these last couple of episodes, while I really thoroughly enjoyed them and really enjoyed a lot of the time spent with these characters and great moments of action and visuals and just great, cool, fun Star Wars fun, I can ultimately say that by the time I got to this final episode, I'm a little torn on how I feel, because the show just feels like it needed another 2 or 3 episodes to fully breathe and explain some more storylines, expand on some things. I think there are a couple of storylines that were introduced here and some new characters that were introduced that were really interesting, but that they ultimately didn't necessarily flesh out everything that was going on there. And the final moments of this final episode was a lot of, okay, here's where this character is, here's where that character is, here's where these characters are, and we're going to kind of set up for the next season or whatever's to come after Ahsoka. Apparently, in terms of all the movies that we're going to be getting in the future, we have 3 Star Wars movies, one that's going to be in the future, one that's going to be in the past, and one that's going to be set around this timeline that's going to be directed by Dave Filoni, who is one of the directors for this season, but most notably is the main writer, as he was the main showrunner for this season. Dave Filoni is essentially the prodigal son. He's like the greatest decision that George Lucas made in his final days at Lucasfilm when he was working on the Clone Wars, bringing on Dave Filoni, teaching him all he knows, and he's pretty much the greatest mind, in my opinion, that's working at Lucasfilm that really truly understands George's vision when it comes to Star Wars. And so he's actually going to be directing his own movie that is apparently going to be the culmination of the storylines that we've been seeing him be involved in. So the Clone Wars, Rebels, Ahsoka, and most notably also The Mandalorian. And so my guess is that this Ahsoka series and a lot of the things it's teeing up, as well as where The Mandalorian is heading, a lot of that is all going to be kind of wrapped up in one big movie directed by Dave Filoni, which I guess is meant to be kind of like Star Wars' version of Infinity War or Endgame, if you will. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see what Dave Filoni does with that. I'm really excited to see where Ahsoka goes moving forward, but I will have to say, in terms of a gripe, I just think that this show needed a little bit more length. There's just too many characters and too many little things that were set up that ultimately just didn't feel overly fleshed out, and it did feel like we could have gotten a little bit more plot and a little bit more story over the course of the season. That is my biggest gripe with the show thus far, but it's still open-ended and still leaving us with more to be desired. So it's hard to have that as a full gripe, because one day this show will be completed, or this storyline will be completed, and I'll be able to watch it through, and I doubt that will really necessarily be a complaint. But as of right now, in terms of a story for the first season, while I do think there is absolutely a sense of finality, similar to Star Wars Rebels, it's one of those things where the show has a sense of finality, but it leaves us open-ended for what's to come. And so, yeah, that's my general thoughts on the season. I thought it was great. Good fun, a lot of fantastic Star Wars stuff. There's one episode in particular, I'll say episode 5, that for me is peak Star Wars, top tier Star Wars, absolutely phenomenal Star Wars. I'm going to leave that for the spoiler section of this video, but I'm happy to say that when it comes down to the production value, when it comes down to the performances, when it comes down to the musical composition, when it comes down to the overall story that is played out and you know, is set up, I do feel like it was a solid season. I just do wish that there was a little bit more that happened in the narrative and the plot across those last few episodes, instead of kind of feeling like we're teeing up for what's to come more so than actually resolving things in this season. Again, I think a lot of that comes down to the length of the seasons, and I think a lot of that comes down to what Disney has really kind of said for their studios to do. You know, we've seen it with Marvel, we've seen it with Star Wars now, we've seen it even with just other random Disney properties that have been getting TV shows. This limited number of episodes in the season is really, I think, what's holding back a lot of these seasons for being a lot better than they possibly could be. Andor was 12 episodes. There's only supposed to be 2 seasons, though, both with 12 episodes. And ultimately, I feel like that really benefited the show to have a really impactful finale that was able to be fleshed out. And now we have another season coming with another 12 episodes. And I think Ahsoka should have easily been 12 episodes. But with all that said, let's talk about some of the cast here. I've talked a lot here. I've been rambling a whole lot. But let's talk about some of the cast specifically and my thoughts. Obviously, I've mentioned a lot about Rosario Dawson. I think she's fantastic in the role of Ahsoka. And yeah, I just think that she was great casting. She's had a lot of fun in the role, and I think that she carries this series very well. David Tennant returns to Star Wars as the character of Hu Yang, who is a character that you could see in the Clone Wars, who is essentially working with younglings on how to create and build their lightsabers. He's a pretty small character in the Clone Wars, but the fact that they brought him here into live action using a blend of CGI and practical effects, I thought was pretty great. And David Tennant is one of my favorite actors, and I just think he's so charming. So to be able to hear him voice this role again and have some great moments with these characters, I think was a lot of fun. Sabine Wren this time around, like I mentioned, is played by Natasha Liu Bordizzo, who I think does a really great job in the role. I think she looks the character a lot. She very much looks like the character of Sabine from the animated show Star Wars Rebels, and I think that she plays the character very well. When we meet her at the very beginning of the show, she's a little bit upset based on how the end of Rebels ended, but it's great to kind of see the relationship between her and Ahsoka kind of grow and have a lot of conflict over the course of the season. That is something I wish they would have expanded upon a little bit more, but ultimately I am excited to see what they do with her character in the future seasons. Mary Elizabeth Winstead plays Harrison Dula, who is a Twi'lek pilot. She was the pilot of the group in Star Wars Rebels, and of course, the love interest to Kanan Jarrus, who unfortunately passes away in Star Wars Rebels. And we get to see her son in this show as well, Jason Syndulla, who is actually played by Evan Whitten, who I enjoyed to see in the show. They don't do a whole lot with him, but I liked his performance for the most part. It does feel very much like a kid performance, so hopefully over time he can kind of add a little bit more to the character in terms of performance. But it was cool to see Jason in live action after only seeing him for a quick glimpse at the very end of Star Wars Rebels. One character we absolutely have to talk about is Baylan Skoll, who is played by Ray Stevenson. And unfortunately, Ray Stevenson, of course, passed away just a couple of months before this was actually going to premiere, and just breaks my heart because Ray Stevenson is a phenomenal actor who I've always loved in many things that I've seen him in, most notably a lot of the Marvel projects I originally saw him in, like Punisher Warzone. But yeah, it just breaks my heart to know that he's passed away. He's a phenomenal actor, and I think he was fantastic in this show as Baylan Skoll, a former Jedi Padawan who of course survived the event of Order 66 and is now kind of torn. You know, he's not a Sith, he's not a typical Inquisitor, he's a dark Jedi who's out there more as a mercenary, and he has his apprentice who he has around named Shin Hati, who is actually played by Ivana Sakno. And I thought the two of them and their chemistry was fantastic. That master and apprentice kind of vibe that the two of them had, I thought was really, really great throughout the course of the show. Really thoroughly enjoyed both of their performances, and just, yeah, man, rest in peace to Ray Stevenson. I'm very curious to see what they do with his character moving forward, as the series, of course, did not plan for his death, and they do leave things open-ended when it comes to the character of Baylan Skoll. I'm sure that the Lucasfilm team is scrambling a little bit in terms of what they're going to do, but I think at the core of the most important part of it is that a man is dead, and an incredibly talented and very memorable and just badass man at that, and somebody who I've heard is apparently an incredibly sweet individual. So you know, my heart goes out to him, his family, his loved ones, and anybody who knew him deeply. So yeah, man, Ray Stevenson, what a loss truly. But then we got to talk about Shin Hati, his apprentice. I thought that she was fantastic in this role. They don't do an abundance with her, and I think that there's something, again, comes down to I wish they would have added more to this character, but I do think Ivana Sakno does a great job of playing the character of Shin Hati. I think that there's a lot that she brings to the character behind her eyes that is really teeing up for a very interesting character as the story progresses. Then we have Diana Lee Inosanto, who plays Morgan Elsbeth, who was originally introduced in The Mandalorian Season 2, which is where we first saw Ahsoka, that very first episode that we see Ahsoka in The Mandalorian, where they do tee up the return of Thrawn. But I think for the most part, she plays the role well. I thoroughly enjoyed that character coming back and her involvement in everything. And yeah, she played the part very well. I had a good time seeing her character again. And if you've seen the marketing for this, then you know that Grand Admiral Thrawn is in this show. I won't get too deep here, again, into spoilers, but it was fantastic to see Lars Mikkelsen return after having voiced the character in Star Wars Rebels to actually play the character in live action. When they said that they were looking to bring Thrawn back into live action, number one, that alone is exciting, but the fact that we're going to be bringing Grand Admiral Thrawn from animation to live action with the same actor was a perfect thing. I didn't want the voice to change, and I think that he did a fantastic job. He was incredible in the role, being able to see Thrawn in live action. As a longtime fan who read the original Thrawn books when I was a kid, and now of course the canon got remade when Disney purchased Star Wars, and now we've had new books and comics that have introduced Thrawn, and of course his big on-screen premiere in Star Wars Rebels. To now have him in live action, it just feels like it's really come full circle. And as a longtime Star Wars fan who's been involved with Thrawn since I was a young boy, it's pretty awesome to feel this payoff of being able to see Thrawn in live action, and I think that Lars Mikkelsen did a fantastic job in the role. And there's more I want to talk about, but unfortunately, I don't want to get too much deeper into things here without putting up a spoiler warning. I know this is a long video already, but let's just jump into the spoiler stuff. So this is your spoiler warning. We're going to talk about some more of the characters that you can see here in the show, and then we're going to get into not a play-by-play, but talk about some big things that I definitely wanted to talk about when it comes down to this show. Another character we get to see that you do see briefly in the trailers, but something something I kind of wanted to wait till we got into the spoiler section here. We got to see Genevieve O'Reilly once again as Mon Mothma, but most notably we get to learn that she is Chancellor Mon Mothma now, which is really great because when you go back in the timeline to Andor, which we will once we get season 2 of Andor, she's still just a senator and she's kind of struggling to make her way up. So to see her now that she's a chancellor, I am curious to see what they do with her character. Another character we get to see in her scenes, which I thought was pretty interesting, is Senator Xiono, played by Nelson Lee. Senator Xiono is the father of Kaz Xiono, who's the main character of Star Wars Resistance. So as soon as I saw that Senator Xiono was involved in this story, while we do know what his fate is based on the event of Star Wars Resistance, it was cool to see a character that's tied into another Star Wars animated show. We see him on that show very briefly, but to see him again here in live action was pretty cool. And his general role here was to be kind of an oppressor when it came to Mon Mothma. He was the main one, kind of giving some lip to Harrison Dula and the rest of the gang. He was the one senator that was fighting back on even the idea that Grand Admiral Thrawn was coming back. But it was nice to see the character in live action, and I think Nelson Lee played the role very well. Paul Sun-Hyung Lee is back as Captain Carson Tevik, of course, who initially premiered on The Mandalorian and is now amongst us here in Ahsoka. I really enjoyed him once again in the role. I think he's a really fun and just likable fighter pilot character. I've always really enjoyed fighter pilots in Star Wars, and a lot of them don't get a whole lot of time to shine, outside of maybe a few that are fan favorites. But in the case of this show, it was great to see Carson Tevik in here once again, and there are some moments where he ties into the events of what we saw in The Mandalorian Season 3. And I mentioned there's some more animated characters that make their first live actions appearance here, and one of them is Clancy Brown as Governor Ryder Azadi, who Clancy Brown has been in tons of Star Wars stuff in animation and in live action with makeup on and playing these different voices and different things like that. But when it comes to the character of Ryder, is a character we saw specifically in Rebels that we get to now see in live action, played once again by Clancy Brown, which I thought was great. And alongside him, we also get to see the character of Senator Jai Kell, played by Vinnie Thomas. And Jai Kell is a character we also saw in Star Wars Rebels, who worked alongside Ezra at a certain point. So it was great to see his character appear in live action incredibly briefly, but if you're a longtime fan, I thought that was really cool. And then another one that I think is going to make most Star Wars fans at least perk up a little bit is, of course, we get to see Anthony Daniels once again as C-3PO. He's always welcomed into this franchise every single time that we want to bring C-3PO back, and it was a very welcome cameo that was brief, just interesting, and I really thoroughly enjoyed the time that he was spent on screen. Also because he name drops General Organa, who I think we all know, Princess Leia. So really thoroughly enjoyed that time with him on screen, even if it was just for a scene. And of course, now we have to talk about the biggest thing that everybody talked about when it came to this show. We got some phenomenal lightsaber battles. We got some phenomenal continuations of the storylines of Clone Wars and Rebels. But the most exciting thing was the very end of episode 4 leading into episode 5, like I mentioned before. That is peak Star Wars for me, and that is the return of Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker once again when Ahsoka is defeated by Baylan Skoll and falls into the world between worlds, an interdimensional force location that was introduced in Star Wars Rebels, where she actually got to come face to face for the first time with Anakin since he became Darth Vader. Of course, we know that they fought in Star Wars Rebels, her and Vader, but she had not had the chance to see him as Anakin Skywalker in his Force Ghost form. And the end of episode 4 shows us Hayden Christensen standing there. He says, "Hey, Snips," and yeah. It was emotional. Not gonna lie, it was pretty phenomenal to see Hayden Christensen there. There's some de-aging being done there. I didn't really mind it, to be completely and utterly honest, but I really and thoroughly enjoyed this whole segment of time. We jump into episode 5, and majority of the episode is Ahsoka and Anakin as they are lightsaber dueling, and Anakin is using this moment to kind of test Ahsoka. He wants to test her not only as a Jedi, but as a master, as she's struggling at this point in the storyline on how to tackle being Sabine's master. And so this whole episode, in the 5th episode, is Anakin testing her through lightsaber battles and also using the world between worlds to take her back to certain points in their life, which was phenomenal. We jump back to the Clone Wars events. We get to see multiple battles from the Clone Wars in live action with Ahsoka and Anakin, with Hayden Christensen wearing the Anakin Skywalker Clone Wars outfit from the animated show, which was crazy to see. I could not believe that this was happening. And you have Ariana Greenblatt, who I've seen in a couple of movies now, and you know, good for her for having so many big roles at such a young age. She plays the young Ahsoka, and I thought she did a phenomenal job playing these roles. I really enjoyed the time spent with her and Anakin in this. And again, a lot of it is just Anakin taking her through these different memories and kind of using them as metaphors to help kind of get her in the right headspace to be the true Jedi that she can be, and to be the true Jedi Master that she can be, not only for herself, but also for Sabine, which sets up how the show ends with her officially training Sabine, which I'm really excited to see what they do, as the show now has a parallel, as George Lucas used to always love to say. He loves that Star Wars rhymes. He wants it to be like a poem, that the different stanzas should rhyme. Of course, the end of this show has things the opposite way around, where now Ezra and Thrawn have left where they were, and now Ahsoka and Sabine were left behind where Ezra and Thrawn were after the event of Star Wars Rebels. It very much in George Lucas fashion, it rhymes like the last story, and I think it sets things up really in an awesome way. Again, that 5th episode was incredible to see. I was just geeking out the entire time, and for me, it was just more so of a validation that if you have not seen the Clone Wars and Rebels, you're just doing yourself a disservice. There's just no way in hell that you're gonna fucking be able to understand and fully be appreciative of what's going on narratively here and the payoff of what we're seeing with Anakin and Ahsoka if you have not seen the Clone Wars and Rebels. I just think that you are doing yourself a stupidly, wildly dumb disservice in every way, shape, or form. That episode was epic by all means, and it was pretty awesome too because it ends with the Purrgil, who of course were a big part of how Ezra and Thrawn went missing at the very end of Rebels. It ends with Ahsoka kind of having this incredible Jedi moment with the Purrgil, where she rides the Purrgils to where Thrawn and Ezra are, and just altogether that episode was phenomenal. Hayden Christensen is so great in the role of Anakin. As somebody who was a kid in the prequel era and stood up for Hayden Christensen and loved the prequels and was told countlessly that those movies were not good by so many people, it is just so validating and so heartwarming to see Obi-Wan, and now to see Ahsoka, where Hayden Christensen has come back and is just getting this massive amount of love from the fans who have grown up with those films, and even the longtime old school fans who maybe didn't like the prequels before and have grown to appreciate them. He's getting all the love in the world right now, and I love that for him. I love Hayden Christensen. I always have been a Hayden Christensen fan as Anakin Skywalker, and so to have these moments now that echo the Clone Wars and all this other material is just... It just blows my mind. I don't feel like I could genuinely sit here and just talk about this without going on and on and on and on. I just genuinely loved it, if you can't already tell. And yeah, that episode was fantastic. It was great to see Hayden Christensen. Again, massive kudos to Ariana Greenblatt, who played young Ahsoka. I thought that was great. And Rosario Dawson gives a phenomenal performance in that episode as well. There are so many great visuals. And we also get to see Tamora Morrison appear briefly as Captain Rex. So the first time in live action, one of the most notable clone characters that really was expanded upon in the Clone Wars and in Rebels and in other material as well. It was amazing to see all of these people in live action, and just to see these moments that longtime Star Wars fans have been dying to see in live action. What a good episode, man. I just can't believe some people think that they can watch the show without having seen the other stuff and even pretend that they can understand it or that they can feel the emotional weight. Even if you saw it and you thought it was cool and maybe it brought interest to you to go back and watch the Clone Wars and Rebels, then cool. I hope you do that for sure. But if you're still just like, I don't want to watch the animated stuff and you just want to watch this, go fuck yourself. And so with all that, let's talk about just the way the show wrapped up. As I mentioned before, it feels like it's a classic Star Wars thing, classic George Lucas thing. It's like poetry. It rhymes. Star Wars Rebels ends with Ezra and Thrawn just getting whipped away by the Purrgil into another galaxy, Ezra, of course, sacrifices himself to get Thrawn away from everybody, away from the galaxy, trapping them in another galaxy. And now, to flip things around, Ahsoka and Sabine, who went to go rescue Ezra, were now left behind, while Ezra and Thrawn are now back in the traditional Star Wars galaxy. Ezra has been reunited with Hera Syndulla. Hera's a character I wish they would have done a little bit more with in the season, but they really didn't do an abundance with. And the one thing I was incredibly gutted to see was that we did not see Zeb in this season at all. He's mentioned one time, one quick name drop, but after setting him up in The Mandalorian Season 3, I was so excited for the prospect of him being in this season. So I'm assuming that they're really just saving Zeb for future storytelling, and that he's going to show up later on. But I was very heartbroken to see that Zeb was not in this season. But yeah, so the show ends with that kind of being where our characters are. There's a great moment at the very end where Ahsoka sees a Force ghost of Anakin watching over Ahsoka about to start training with Sabine. We see that Shin Hati has gone back to that kind of just group of just like tribe people that are on that planet. It looks like she's going to kind of like team up with them, as Baylan Skoll has gone off on his own, and we pan out to where he is, and he's actually standing on a mountain that is shaped like the Mortis gods. You have the Father, the Daughter, and the Son. And for those of you who are not, if you made it this far and you don't know who the Mortis gods are, you need to watch the Clone Wars. But this means some big things. The fact that we're seeing the Mortis gods in live action is pretty phenomenal. The daughter's head is cut off and the son's head is not. So I'm very curious to see if that symbolizes anything as we move forward. I'm very excited to see how the Mortis gods are going to play into anything that's going on. And I really don't know what the fuck they're going to do when it comes to Ray Stevenson's death. I'm really very curious to see how they're going to handle that, and when it comes to Baylan, because they're clearly setting up for a lot of things. And I don't want to sit here and do a whole play-by-play. This video is going on way longer. I'm almost at 40 minutes unedited, just sitting here rambling and talking. I loved Ahsoka. I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves as well. I'm sure a lot of you have similar gripes to what I have in terms of the length of the show and certain things that felt undercut or felt under-explained or underdeveloped. I think that that's going to be a main criticism that people have of the show, is that it should have been longer and that certain things needed to be expanded upon a lot more. But I think, again, it's going to be one of those things where once we have the follow-up, and you can just binge through it all, you won't necessarily feel that as much anymore. I just think that we want more now. But, you know, I'll be patient. I trust Dave Filoni. I trust the incredibly talented people at Lucasfilm who have been giving me these stories that I really enjoy. And as a longtime Star Wars fan who just really appreciates the fact that I'm able to see Star Wars in this way, where characters from the animated stuff are continuing their story in live action, I'm just very grateful for that. And I'm not going to take any more of you guys' time. So hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.